Hello and welcome, I'm Aidan the Happy Bluesman, and today we are going to be looking at 6 tips that will help you craft better and more interesting blues guitar solos. Now, these are sort of more aimed on the beginner side of the spectrum, so if you're just getting started in this wonderful but potentially overwhelming world of blues guitar improvisation, these are going to be absolutely perfect. And the reason for this is they're going to give you a framework. They are going to give you a structure for things to think about and focus on and improve. It can be so difficult when you're starting out to know if your improvisations are improving, if things are getting better, and it can be a very hit and miss process. By the end of this video, you're going to have these 6 things to focus on, and every time you go to improvise and craft your own solos, you're going to have that very clear structure to work on. So, let's get into it. Okay, so diving right in, tip number 1, slow things down. Almost every guitar player that I work with who's getting started has this sort of pressure that comes from within them to play fast. They want to play like their heroes, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Rory Gallagher, Gary Moore, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix. All of these sort of blues rock players who have speed as a central part of their style. Now, speed is an amazing tool to have in your toolkit. It can bring energy and momentum into the playing, but it can be super problematic if that's the main thing that you're focusing on, especially if all of your improvisations are pushing up at your technical limit. So if you're sort of playing and you're ending up with phrases where you're really on the edge of control and things are losing a little precision and a little clarity, and you're getting that clipped sound and things are not going quite the way that you want, bring the speed down. It will make everything easier, everything more enjoyable. It's like driving a car. If you're always driving the car right up at the speed limit and pushing over that speed limit, you have less time to think, less time to react, less time to plan. And eventually, once you get to those corners and those trickier bits, the likelihood that you're going to veer out of control becomes much, much greater. So slowing things down provides this sort of beautiful virtuous circle in which you have more time to think, more time to plan your next lick, and more time for the guitar to do its work. You have a beautiful resonant instrument here that creates wonderful sounds, and if you're always playing fast and jumping from one note to the next, you're not really letting the guitar breathe and do its job that it was intended to do. So in that opening solo, you'll note that I was really taking things nice and slow. All of the phrases were sort of unfolding like this. Everything under control, everything ringing out clearly, no clipped notes, and for me, as a player, no pressure. Just have time to think about what I'm doing, I have time to add my vibrato to make things sound nice, and it just keeps things nice and easy and flowing. So, take things nice and slow, the speed will come, and there'll be exercises and drills that you can do to make that happen over time. But when you're improvising and you're getting into it, bring the pace down, stay within your comfort zone technically, and focus on the phrasing, making things sound good, letting the guitar resonate, and all of that good stuff, which we will cover in the next few tips. Tip number 2, leave more space between the phrases. So, just in the way that we all feel this pressure to play fast when we're getting going, we all feel the pressure to play a lot, to sort of pack as many notes into the solos as possible. This very, very, very rarely results in the best and most effective blues solos. Why? Because the most effective blues solos mimic the human voice. They're vocal, they're expressive, and when we're speaking, we have to pause for breath. If we don't take those pauses, it sounds very, very unnatural. So again, in all of the examples so far, in that opening solo, there's a lot of space between my phrases. I sort of start here. And then there's a nice pause before I go on to the next phrase. Again, another pause. Pause again. And so on. It takes confidence to do that as a player. It can feel very disconcerting. It's like, but I'm not playing anything I should be playing. This feels awkward. But the analogy here is like public speaking. If you watch a public speaker who is confident, knows what they're talking about, they leave spaces. They land their points, let them sink in, pause, and then they go on to the next bit. Conversely, if you watch a public speaker who is embarrassed, awkward, a bit new in the game, then they're going to pack everything in on top of each other. And they're not going to give you space or time to even think about what they're really talking about. The blues guitar equivalent of that is something like this. So, in there was some cool ideas, there were some cool phrases, nothing was really wrong, but because I've just bombarded you with phrase after phrase after phrase, you're not able to enjoy really any of them because you've just heard one idea and then I'm straight on to the next one. So, whilst it might feel awkward, try to leave space. Let the backing track or bandmates or whoever you're playing with do some of the work. Let that become part of the solo and choose the moments that you drop in and then play your next phrase. It will feel challenging, but it will result in a much more musical, much bluesier, much more vocal solos that feel more natural. And again, you're taking the pressure off yourself as an improviser. You're not having to react so quickly. You're not having to think so quickly to get onto the next phrase. You have time, you can plan, and then you go on to the next little bit. So, tip number 2, leave plenty of space in your playing. Okay, tip number 3, and we're going to dip our toes into a little theory here, is target the tonic notes. Now, what we're talking about here is intervals. Intervals describe the distance between notes, and every interval has a quality which affects the way that it functions in a musical context. Now, to cover intervals in depth is a whole other series of videos, and thankfully I have a course on this inside the Blues Club, which breaks down what intervals are in depth, talks about them, and gives you all the resources and knowledge you need to implement them in your playing, which is really useful because they are an essential part of theory if you want to understand what's happening on the guitar. But without going through all of that, we can cover some essentials here which will help make your solos more intentional and make your playing sound more confident. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about targeting the tonic note. If you're playing in a key, like here we're playing in the key of A minor, the tonic note is the note of A. It is the kind of musical home base. It sounds very resolved and it sounds very comfortable. So if I put the backing track on and play that key of A minor and just play various different notes of A on the fretboard, you will hear that they have a very resolved sound. There's no musical tension there. I can hold that note and it sounds great. Have a little listen. Nothing nothing too exciting, but hopefully you could hear that that note just fit perfectly with what was going on in the backing track. I could hold that note all day, no tension there, feels very, very resolved. Now, what does this mean for your blues guitar solos? It means if you target that note at the end of your phrases, it will sound like a musical full stop. It will feel intentional and it will bring that phrase to a logical sort of conclusion. So if I now play a couple of phrases targeting those same tonic notes that I've just played over that backing track, hopefully you'll see that in action. So what I was doing there was ending every phrase on the note of A. Now, in the first and second positions of the minor pentatonic scale, the A minor pentatonic scale where we're playing, you're going to find 4 notes of A. You're going to find one here, on that 5th fret on the low E string. You're going to find one here on the 7th fret of the D string. One here on the 5th fret of the high E string. And finally, another one at the 10th fret on the B string in that second shape. Now, you're going to find the many more tonic notes of A all over the fretboard in all 5 shapes of the minor pentatonic scale. However, just keeping that nice focused approach, when you're in shapes 1 and 2, those are the notes that you can be targeting to bring your phrases to a resolution. And when you do, it's like creating that musical full stop. You say the point, you make your point, and then the point closes off in a very logical way. If you don't do that, and you land on a different note, sometimes that will work. Other times it will feel like you're sort of stopping in the middle of the sentence. It will feel a bit awkward and it will feel unresolved. It will feel like you want to move somewhere else. So let me show you a little bit quickly what that looks like over the backing track. So, nothing there was really creating any harsh tension. No one was sort of, crying out in pain at the licks that were being created. But that intentionality wasn't there. Sort of landing the clear points and then moving on, that was lacking in those examples. It felt very much more like, what's the next thing that you're going to say? Because I wasn't landing on those notes necessarily, which have a strong sense of resolution. Now, we can take this many levels deeper. We can think about how to manipulate those other notes to create a little bluesy tension. We can think about other notes beside the tonic that create resolution. But for now, dive deep into those ideas. Try targeting and creating licks around those 4 notes in those first positions. And from there, you can then move on to different parts of the fretboard and then start to think about other notes and sort of expanding your repertoire beyond just that tonic. For that sort of stuff, again, there's many more resources inside the Blues Club, and for diagrams of the fretboards and where these tonic notes appear, hit the link below and you'll find more resources and lessons for this sort of stuff. But tip number 3, target the tonic at the end of your phrases. Tip number 4, go heavy on technique. Every guitarist that I work with who's starting out on this blues path, they always want more information, more complicated scales, more complicated theory. They want to get away from the minor pentatonic scale, all that sort of stuff. Makes sense. I've been there as well. And of course, there is life beyond the minor pentatonic scale. However, what all of these players often overlook is the importance of technique, of bending, of sliding, of using hammer-ons, pull-offs, combining these ideas together, vibrato. to add life and seasoning and a beautiful sound to the playing. Because even when you know all of that theoretical stuff, if you're playing the blues, if you're playing blues rock, you are mostly going to be using the minor pentatonic scale, the major pentatonic scale, the blues scales, a few other little pieces, and you're mostly going to be playing over fairly simplistic chord progressions. So if you just navigate across the scale shapes and just play notes without doing anything to breathe any life into them, it will inevitably sound stale. And what often happens is players don't include enough technique and they end up with their solos sounding a little bit like this. Again, nothing offensive there, no wrong notes were played, everything was in the scale, but it's lacking any vocality, any expression, any life, because if you're playing just the notes of the scale, even if you're doing so rhythmically and your sort of phrasing is quite nice, it's lacking all of that seasoning. It's like cooking a meal without any herbs or spices or salt or pepper. It's going to feel bland. If we compare that now with a solo sort of chock full of technique, you can hopefully see the difference. So there, I'm using the same scale shapes, all the same notes are being played, but almost no notes are just being played without some sort of technique. I was using slides, hammer-ons, pull-offs, bends combining hammer-ons and pull-offs, vibrato, all of these different ideas which bring those notes to life. So when you're thinking about improving your solos, improving your playing, don't just think about more complexity. You have two big paths or two big areas that you can work on. More complexity, more scales, more theory, playing the changes, all of that good stuff. And you can also think about technique, better phrasing, more vocality, improved vibrato, better bending, better combination of techniques. Everyone chooses that first one. They all want more complexity. Do not neglect this one. It is core to your progress as a blues player. It will instantly make your playing sound better. And that is what your blues guitar heroes are doing in their playing. They are bending, they are sliding, they are combining these ideas together in interesting ways. So, at the risk of going on about this, really double down on this and get granular. So often, I see players who go, yeah, I can bend. And every single bend that they play is like I just did there. As if bending were a single technique with a single execution and that's it. Job done. That is not the case. You can alter bending in 100 different ways. You can alter the speed. You can alter the journey. You can play different types of bends, pre-bends, unison bends, and so on. There are so many different ways that you can cut that technique. And when you then start to combine bends with, say, pull-offs, then you introduce a new set of variations, and so it goes. So don't just sort of say, yep, I can do slides, I can do these things, and then move on. Get granular. How could I change that bend? How can I combine that bend with something else? Can I put a slide there? Can I do a hammer-on into a bend, into a slide? And then do the reverse, a slide into a pull off into a bend. There are all of these different combinations, and when you really dig into the weeds here, it's a huge amount of fun, and it will absolutely transform your playing. So, keep focused on technique, keep pushing there, keep trying to expand your comfort zone and dig and create new ideas. It will absolutely alter your solos for the better. Tip number 5, give yourself permission to repeat ideas. New guitar players who are getting started on this improvisational journey always have an aversion to repetition. Why? Because they feel it sort of exposes their lack of a lick library or 100 different blues licks that they can pull out at any moment. But the problem that this creates for them is that, number one, puts them under a huge amount of pressure to be constantly creating new ideas. Number two, for the listener, it is not ideal. Why? Because we like something to sort of grip onto. We like choruses in songs. We like to sing along to sort of the repeated lyrics that come around in those choruses. And it's the same for melodies, for guitar solos. We like things that we can sing along to. And a lot of the most famous blues guitar solos and sort of motifs and riffs are very memorable because they are repeated and they sort of stick in the ear. Still Got the Blues by Gary Moore. A lot of John Mayer's stuff is very sort of melodic and memorable. So far from shying away from repetition, it should be something that you should actively be trying to include in your solos. 2, take a little pressure off you and give your listeners some melodic content to sort of grasp onto and go, okay, right, I sort of expected that, that's cool. As opposed to just bombarding them with lick after lick after lick. Now, repetition, in my view, can manifest itself in one of two ways. You can, as the name suggests, just repeat a lick over and over and over again. And this works really, really well for building a little tension and creating some momentum in the solo. So in the solo for Tightrope, for example, by Stevie Ray Vaughan, he hits this idea in the key of B. So he's playing the B minor pentatonic scale. He's tuned down to E flat, so technically B flat minor, but he's here on the fretboard. And he does this. And he just plays that over and over and over again. It's the exact same group of notes. He's just bombarding us with that. And then he goes on to something else and it kind of creates this amazing spark of energy in the solo. Another super famous example of that would be the solo to Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page is up here. And again, for that momentum building process, he just hits the same lick over and over again. And then moves off to kind of the climactic part of the solo. So far from being something where you're thinking, oh God, guys, come on, we've heard this lick before. It's the exact opposite. As a listener, you're gripped. You're wanting to hear the next little bit. And provided that you follow that up with something cool and interesting, it's going to work just brilliantly in your blues guitar solos. The second way that you can sort of articulate repetition is with something that is more pattern-based. So you might not be playing the exact same lick over and over again, but you're sort of hinging around the same positions or the same series of notes, and you're maybe just altering one or two things. So for example, in the Cream song Strange Brew, and I've got a full deep dive into this song which breaks down all of the techniques, Eric Clapton does this at the beginning. That's how the song starts. So he's not exactly repeating himself because the two sections of that intro solo are ever so slightly different. But ever so slightly different is the key part there. They are super similar. He's just changing one or two pieces and the rest is basically fundamentally the same. Again, far from being boring, it gives that solo a coherent feel. It gives it structure and it gives us as listeners something to grasp onto. So rather than just bombarding us with new lick after new lick, allow yourself either to repeat ideas and just repeat them, or to let ideas unfold and sort of return to the same positions on the fretboard. Allow things to sort of develop in each section a little more slowly. Hopefully, the repetition point of just hammering the same idea is quite simple. But let me show you what the second point might look like in that key of A minor using the A minor pentatonic scale. So what I was doing there was I was basically repeating almost every phrase. So I would play the first phrase, and then I would kind of use the same beginning there to get into the next phrase. And so on for the whole solo. Again, hopefully, far from being boring, the solo felt coherent. It felt like it had a structure. It wasn't just a series of licks played one after the next. So, if you're struggling with that kind of lick factory idea of, oh, what's the next lick I'm going to play? Give yourself permission to repeat either exactly the phrase that you were playing before or in the way that I've just done there. And that is tip number 5. Okay, number 6, possibly my favorite, and I think one of the best ways to give your solos that coherent and structured feeling is to use a motif. Now, in a sense, we're building off that repetition idea. We're giving ourselves permission to say, right, I'm going to hang in a certain area of the fretboard and I'm going to let this idea unfold. Now, what is a motif? Put simply, it's a short repeated musical idea which becomes a kind of central part of the song through its repetition. We hear motifs all over the place in music. They kind of sort of started with classical music, songs like Beethoven's Fifth, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, would be probably the most famous musical motif of all time. But they appear a lot in the blues and in blues guitar as well. So if it's some sort of more relevant musical context for you, songs like Still Got the Blues by Gary Moore, that would be an example of a motif which kind of repeats throughout the song and becomes a central part of the song which Moore uses in his solos and then returns back to. And another sort of more simplistic, technically simplistic example would be Eric Clapton's slightly more pop bluesy song, Wonderful Tonight, where the motif is like this. So that is the central motif there. And in fact, if you're interested in sort of how Clapton uses that, how he develops it, how he solos and then returns to it, there's a full course inside the Blues Club where I break down what's happening there, how to improvise, the musical context of the song, and how Clapton gets that beautiful, crisp, sort of singing, sweet blues tone. But what's happening there, sort of at a very high level, is he's using a motif. He's relying on that repeated bending idea, and he's using that to hinge and sort of create the essence of his solos. And you can do the same in any musical context. So if you're in that key of A minor, as we are here, rather than feeling one lick onto the next lick, onto the next lick, and everything is different, you can create a very simplistic idea, use that as an anchor, develop it, alter it a little bit, and then you always have the option to return to it. So, how do we do this? Number one, we create something super simple that feels natural for you to do. It should not be a 20-note idea with all this different complex technique. It should be very simple, like that Clapton one. Something that comes easily and natural to your fingers. From there, we establish the motif by repeating it a couple of times. We then develop the motif by altering slightly what's happening. We then move away from the motif into something a little sort of different and more varied. And then we always have the option to return back to that motif. So let me show you how that might look in practice over the backing track. So there, I established that opening motif. I repeated it. I then used it as a launch pad to get into the rest of the solo. So what does that do? It gives you as a listener something to grip onto, gives you a feeling of coherence in the solo and structure. And as an improviser, it gives me something. It gives me a comfort blanket that I can return to. I'm not having to turn myself into a lick machine, pumping out one lick after the next, and every single one is different. I can use phrasing, pausing, different techniques to just twist that motif and then keep the solo pushing on. So that's a really, really beautiful way of structuring your solos, taking a little pressure off you, improving the quality and the coherence of what you're doing, and giving you that sort of feeling of comfort even when you're crafting new ideas. So the sixth and final tip there is use a motif. When you're doing that, you don't have to stick to one motif. You can create lots of different ideas all over the fretboard in different positions of the minor pentatonic scale. We've kept here in shapes 1 and 2, but you can apply that all over the place. The key thing is keep the motif simple and sort of make it easily repeatable. If those two things are not there, then it will be a struggle. Something that you can play naturally and easily and that you can repeat. Other than that, you are good to go. And that brings these 6 tips to a close. If you've got any questions, you've got comments, you want to share your tips, hit the comments below. Please let me know what you thought of this, how you're getting on, and if I can help in any way. And if you want the backing track for this, the full tabs for this, for the solo, the intro solo, the various different licks, and 5 bonus licks that you can use to give structure to your playing, then hit the link below, join the Blues Club. You'll get access to all those resources, a further 20 courses, and one-to-one support from me if you have any questions when you're going through the material. Otherwise, good luck guys, and I will see you soon.